The Cemetery of Untold Stories, where stories go to die, or maybe not, maybe to be reborn and have a life of their own, to meet other stories in this weird setting. So today we're going to talk about the book by Julia Alvarez called The Cemetery of Untold Stories. And it's such a beautiful book. I loved this book. You have these two authors. One of them, they are pretty famous and are a rising star, and the other one is a friend of this author. Her name's Alma, and she's writing and she hasn't really got a toe in the door yet, but her writer friend kind of helps her out a little bit and brings her to these different conferences, and so she starts to gain some traction. And the writer friend, doesn't really trust anyone and has all these different stories, and there's this one story that she's been wanting to tell her whole life, but she just can't get it out. And at some point, she says to her friend, she's like, "If I die, can you please tell the story of my character Cleo or something along those lines?" And she's like, "I can't tell the story of your characters, that's for you to do." And so slowly this other author kind of goes like insane. And it might have been because of the story that she couldn't tell or get out. Maybe. So this woman, Alma, she ends up having like a fantastic career and becomes an author and gains some renown. At some point, she has like this collection of stories that she's wanted to tell for a long time, but she just is unable to. And so she was living in the States. She moves back home to her homeland of the Dominican Republic, and she inherits this piece of property. And on it, she decides to build a cemetery for untold stories where she can bury all of her stories because she can't find the way to tell them. And at some point, after she buries them, she hires on a woman, Philomena, to come help her and gets to know her. And these stories start to take on a life of their own. And part of Philomena's duties, taking care of this graveyard of lost stories, is to just sit by the different sculptures, because they have sculptures where the graves are, kind of like headstones, and to listen. And Philomena starts to hear these stories of these characters where they wanted their stories told, but maybe just not necessarily published. As these stories are woven and you get to hear them and hear the characters' voices, it's so beautiful and heartbreaking and emotional, and just like the interlacing ties of family, and then you have like the actual characters' life stories, but then these characters of the cemetery of untold stories, and then they start talking to each other, like the characters from the stories that are in the different grave areas. And you have the people that live around there all curious about like what this eccentric writer is doing with like a graveyard of stories. They're like, what do you people aren't buried there? Pets? No? Like what is a cemetery of lost stories? At first, she doesn't really open up the place to have people come in, and she ends up hiring Philomena because people would like come over the wall and kind of break in and like mess stuff up, and people being people. She starts taking care of the place, and she hears the stories of these characters. One of the characters is the father of Alma. At the end of his life, the sisters and her all kind of thought like he ended up getting dementia like the mother did, because he would kept repeating like certain phrases and a name. The story of her father actually ends up being told, and like what those words and phrases he was saying, and the fact that maybe he didn't have dementia, he just didn't want to open up and share certain parts of his life. He tricked most of the sisters, but not quite Elma, because Elma always had her suspicions about what these places or people were that he would like let the words slip every once in a while. And so you get that story as well. And then there's also, it seems like, a weird connection between Philomena and the father, and just like a weird interlacing kind of story that may or may not tie into her own. Fantastic book. Love the concept of it. Like, what a cool story idea. Like you bury these stories because you don't know how to tell them, and then the stories start having a life of their own, and then talking to each other, and then actually sharing their stories with one who will listen, but who isn't going to go blob it all over the place. So, great book. It's strange, it's ethereal, it's eerie, and quite beautiful. If you're a fan of strange and creepy books, the next video coming up will be about that, so stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.